2, 1.
Good morning and welcome to today's Strong Communities. I am County Councillor Lisa Dimmock, the Chair of Strong Communities. What I will ask members to do when you speak, can you please introduce yourself, and can officers do the same rather than us go round and do introductions at the beginning. So if we go to item 1, which is apologies for absence, I believe we've had Councillor Eason's apologies sent in. Is that correct, Hazel? Is there anyone else?
Yes, Chair, I've just had also notification from Councillor Webb. She's a little bit late. She will try to join us as soon as she can.
Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest, if we just do as and when. Obviously, there's no members of the public that have requested to speak, so we'll go straight on to item 4, scrutiny of the Public Protection Performance Report, and I will hand over to Dave.
Thank you, Chair. So if I quickly cover item 4, which is the covering report, that just outlines the purpose of why the performance report is here today. So hopefully members of this committee are familiar with the process now. Obviously it's November this year, you might think that's a bit late for 1920, but because of the COVID pandemic, it has been somewhat hands to pumps here. So I think, and I agreed with the Chair pre-meeting, what we'll do is we'll very quickly cover 4. 4A is the annual report that members will be familiar with, so I'll cover that off, but more with a focus of inviting members any questions on 4A. And I think probably members will be more interested in our COVID response as from March this year, so that'll cover the 6-month period, April through to September. And I'm sure that's probably where members want to focus their attention. So in that order then, Chair and Councillors, I'll quickly, in terms of report 4 on the agenda, this is a repeat of what we do with members every year. It's to consider the performance report for 1920. Like I say, I think we'll pause then and take any members, so I'm not going to dwell too much on that. And then, as I say, we'll focus particularly on 4B, which is the COVID response. So in terms of the covering report, obviously it is here because members will recall we've been doing this now for 5 years, and it's a consequence of a cabinet report way back in January 2015, where members did accept some budget reductions back then on the proviso that we regularly report performance to see if there's any detriment to what the service provides. So that's really what the covering report outlines, is the background, why it's here, and it gives a very brief summary in section 3 as to where we are in terms of last year. Generally, services stack up. If you look at 3.2, we're generally achieving what we set out to do. We are a service that is, we have more governing bodies than most. We got Health, Food Safety Agency, FSA, we've got Health and Safety Executive, we've got DEFRA, we've got Drinking Water Inspectorate, Welsh Government, various different governing bodies that obviously keep a careful eye on our performance as we go through the year. So that's generally, I'm not going to talk any more about the covering report. So then if I go to agenda item 4A, that covers the actual report proper. As I say, I'll stop at the end of this one. And if I could ask members, if you can refer to the section numbers, because I think people navigate these reports differently. Some have hard copies, some are on screen. So if you've got any questions you want highlighting when I pause, you can say, you know, regarding section 511, we will know exactly where we are then from an officer perspective. So in terms of the annual report, which is 4A, that outlines the purpose. So obviously that outlines what we're here for. So it's about outcomes to vulnerable people, etc. It's quite an array of services, as members will know from these annual reports we provide. Section 3 covers the staff resource. So you see, we got, and that remains fairly static. We've got 35 staff across the 4 teams, of which so it's about 30.5 full-time equivalents. So, you know, in terms of what do you get for that investment, we talk about the performance. Section 3.2 just gives an update on the finances. So last year we had a budget of 1.359 million, and we spent slightly in excess of that, which equates to an overspend of 27,000, as outlined in section 3.2. So that represents a 2% overspend from the total annual budget. So I think that's good performance. I think if I could manage my household budget in such a fine way, then I think we'd be happy. So I think that represents good performance in terms of the budget. Section 4 covers the performance, and again, members who will recall, we do look back over the last few years to see how we're comparing. So that's covered in figure 1, and the right-hand column picks up the performance in 1920 year. So the first section covers the commercial team. I should have, Chair, said that Jill Dickens not with us today. She's at a COVID regional meeting that I would normally attend, so Jill would normally be here to cover the commercial side. So that is the bit that covers food safety inspections, health and safety, infectious disease control, hence our heavy involvement with TTP, which will come to under 4B. Hygiene training, etc. is covered in the first part of figure 1. Hughes' team covers general public health, so that's the housing service, statutory nuisance, again members will be familiar with neighbour disputes, feuds between people, the enviro-crime stuff in terms of fly tipping, littering, dog fouling, etc., pest control, so that's Hughes' side, that's there. Members will see that performance is generally held steady through the 1920 year. The next section then covers licensing, which is Linda leads on. So that covers obviously the licensed premises, the service requests they get, the taxi trade, other licensing issues that they cover in terms of entertainment, etc. Then trading standards and animal health is covered as the last section of figure 1. So again, generally you'll see the performance remains relatively static. We're pleased to say, which is good news. So that's all covered in the figure 1. So section 5 then, which I won't go through now, Chair, but that covers 5.1 is Jill's team, 5.2 is Hughes' team, 5.3 is Linda's, and 5.4 Gareth in terms of animal health training standards. So I won't talk members through that, as they're sent last week, so hopefully they've had an opportunity to see that. And then section 6 then summarises that performance, which I think includes another successful year in terms of performance last year up until the end of March. We do cover our legal obligations. There's a couple of gaps which are covered. We always struggle a bit sometimes with the proactive nature of the work, because the reactive nature, if that makes sense, that always takes precedent, because the phone goes and you've got to respond to the immediacy of people's concerns across that array of services. And then section 7, as per previous annual reports, just covers the summary of where we're up to really, and where we go here on in. So if I pause there, Chair, I think open up to questions through yourself, and obviously, as I say, we're joined by Linda, Hugh and Gareth as well. So back to you, Chair. Thank you. We can't hear you actually, Lisa.
Sorry. Mute, back on. Can you hear me now? Thank you, Dave. Your teams always cover such a wide variety of things, and obviously you've been very busy. I have a quick question. With regards to food hygiene training, obviously courses were cancelled in March. Are we back on track with that now?
No, not as yet. Linda will talk about trying to switch some of the stuff to online training, because we're not obviously quite sure how long it's going to go on for. So I know that Linda will no doubt provide an update in the 4B, Chair. But in terms of the hygiene training, they have been cancelled. It tends to be quite interactive. We give scenarios, etc. But I can get back to you specifically, Chair, on when that's going to resume. Some of it's, and we do report obviously to the FSA, the governing body, on that. But it's generally very successful, and I think when we get to 4B, we'll see the drop in revenue as well, because obviously there's an income stream there that's dried up as well, unfortunately.
Okay, Councillor Petrini.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions. Sorry, it's just a floating head at the moment. I don't know why. I need to change my camera. So thank you for that report. It's a good report. Actually, it's one of the better reports I've seen in this council because it allows you to compare, and that's critical in understanding performance and change. And so I want to thank you for that, because I tear my hair out and I'm losing my hair because the more reports I see from this council with no comparison, it drives me wild. Anyway, start with a positive. With the budget cuts, you talked about performance levels and that we agreed to check performance levels, but then a number of notable areas there has been a drop in performance. And I'm not criticizing you guys here, but if you cut your budget, your performance levels are going to be impacted. So I'll start with the proactive stuff. I find it quite concerning that we are limited on the proactive. I'm assuming this report's pre-COVID now, right? I am right in that. Okay, good. So COVID, that's completely understandable. Proactive stuff is going to go out the window. Pre-COVID, though, it's worrying that proactive stuff is limited by budget cuts, because I think that's where you get kind of the innovative piece and the time to think things through and maybe make connections that you wouldn't normally make. If I could have a few more words on that, I would appreciate that. On actual specifics, on noise, there was a drop in performance and response times. Environmental protection, there's a drop in performance. Inspections carried out, there's a drop. Animal welfare complaints is the noticeable one, dropped from, I think it's 92% down to 63. There is a drop overall. I appreciate not on every category, but there is a noticeable drop. Would you say that is budget cuts and maybe is there a corresponding drop in staff numbers? Or is it was last year just particularly tough? Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Councillor. If I start that, I think Hugh, since you particularly identified first off, thanks for the opening comments. So I put that in the chat bar, Councillor, so we appreciate that. And we always do feedback to the front line. So appreciate your positive comments. In terms of the generality of where we are in terms of the budgets, it has remained static over the last few years in recognition of the hard work that's done. Obviously, other sections, obviously, the budget cuts, which is unfortunate. I know that's again being assured for us for the coming year. So that's positive. So we're on a stable budget footing. But is that enough? I think is your question, isn't it? In terms of there's some detriment to the proactive stance as a result of COVID. We'll probably touch on it under 4B, Chair. I think because of this year, so extraordinary in terms of trying to respond to the pandemic, there's the same people, so there's clearly going to be a detriment for this performance for the 2021 year. I think that is recognised. I was at a national meeting recently and they are looking to see how they can bolster this service through the budget, through Welsh governments. So that's sort of in discussion now, in train hopefully for next April. There's no promises at this stage, but be assured we are around the table in terms of the general budget and what we're expected to deliver. So that's sort of my general comment to where we are. Certainly, it is difficult. I mean, you picked particularly Hugh's and Gareth's areas, and probably as a direct consequence, so they tend to be more reactive. So on Jill's side of it, it does tend to be more routine, the proactive visits. Pleased to say those haven't dropped as per figure 1. But perhaps if I hand over, Chair, to Hugh in terms of the public health concerns raised, and then to Gareth on animal health. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dave, and Chair. Hugh Owen, Principal Environmental Health Officer, the Public Health Team. Yeah, thank you as well, Councillor Petruni, for your comments. If we look at figure 1, and in particular my team, the Environmental Health, the General Public Health Team performance, we tend to record our stats in 2 ways and monitor our performance. The first way is response within 3 working days. So that is where we get a complaint, how quickly the caller gets a response back. Perhaps the one we focus and that stat, I should say, is obviously very, very important, how quickly somebody gets a call back. The second performance indicator we've got is the case is closed within 3 months. And this is particularly important from my point of view, because it's a measure of performance, of how quickly our officers, how effective and how efficiently they're dealing with complaints. So certainly, whilst there's been, as Councillor Petruni said, in response within 3 working days, a drops. Certainly, I'm looking at noise, went from 85% to 81%. Statutory nuisance excluding noise down again, for response within 3 working days. Environment protection again. If you look at the cases closed within 3 months, they've actually gone up. So the performance of the officers in dealing with those complaints have actually improved last year, which is good from my point of view. Just one point I'd make on that: we are a very, very reactive service, and it so happens that our particularly busy period of time is certainly during the summer period, when we get when people start coming out of hibernation, and we get more noise complaints, more environment protection complaints, and that conversely conflicts when our officers want to go on holidays. So certainly for the periods June, July, August, as I got 7 officers in my team, at times, that's down to 3.5 officers working at the busiest time, which is certainly stretches us, limits any proactive work we can certainly do during that period of time. And we do have proactive elements in the housing field, private water supply, caravan sites, etc. And that is then difficult during those periods. Hope that answers your question.
Good morning. Gareth Walters, Trade and Standards and Animal Health Team Manager. Yes, thank you, Councillor Petroni, for picking up on certainly on the animal welfare situation. Historically, as you can see, we've always been fairly consistent in responding, up in the 90%. Last year was particularly difficult with a variety of staff sicknesses, but in particular, we'd lost a long-term experienced member of staff the previous year. And we were having difficulties replacing that experience, and not having any resource to sort of bring in and train up behind was a particular mid last year particularly difficult. I think to reflect back historically before austerity, we did at one point have 5 animal health officers. We are currently at 2.4 full-time equivalents. The 5 originally came about on the back of foot and mouth, and the additional government funding that we had, which gradually over time eased off. At the moment, we have got 2.4 full-time equivalents. Part of the reason for that is that I have the strategic lead for Trading Standards Wales for animal health and welfare, and liaise quite closely with Welsh Government. And as a result of that, we've got some additional funding being put into animal health, albeit a small amount of 200,000 for across Wales, but I'm able to coordinate that. And one reason we've got an experienced officer at the moment is that I've been able to use that money to bring in somebody who we probably wouldn't have attracted. We have got 2 new officers who joined us at the end of last calendar year. But obviously with COVID, that's had a significant impact on their development and trying to bring them up to speed in what is a significantly wide-ranging area, on top of that wider range of trading standards. So yes, it is difficult, and this year certainly hasn't helped in any way. We constantly given the government the message to Welsh Government about the difficulties across all local authorities from an animal health and welfare perspective. Apart from the larger authorities who've got 6 or 7 members of staff, i.e. Powys, Carmarthen, everybody else, we're really talking are struggling on that front. And I'm sure recently you would have seen that, even the RSPCA have had to sort of draw back from the inspectorate side as well. Is there anything else?
Councillor Petruni, do you wish to come back?
Just to say, I appreciate that. I know there's a long-term sickness around inspections carried out, isn't there? It seems to be marked out in the report. Because of COVID, actually, I know 4B will deal with this, but if last year we dropped to 63%. I appreciate everything you've just explained, but there's been a surge in people getting pets, particularly dogs. So I suspect the demand might increase, not decrease for you. So is it worth this committee focusing on that in the next few meetings in terms of our forward plan? I know that's a different item, Chair, but I flag it now. Given the drop and given the surge in people owning pets, would it be worth us focusing on this, in your opinion?
I can certainly, yeah, I'd certainly encourage it, maybe a conversation offline initially to have a bit more around that, because what I haven't added in here is that we are currently leading on a 3-year project for Welsh Government, specifically around dog breeding and looking at the whole picture in Wales, hopefully introducing a new model. But alongside that, you've got, as Councillor Petroni correctly points out, all these issues around people buying pets. Only 8% of the market of puppies in Wales is made up from licensed breeders, so it just shows such a significant issue out there, and we are currently handling a 3-year project for Welsh Government. So again, I'm happy to talk about that, but maybe if we want a conversation offline, and then we can consider what needs to be done going forward.
Councillor Petroni, would you like us to set up a meeting to discuss that further with Gareth? Because obviously, as a fellow dog lover, there's something I'm quite passionate about as well, and we are seeing a rise, I think, in all our wards. People think it's necessary, oh well, now I've got all this time at home, I'll get a dog, but what will happen in 12 to 18 months, and they go back to work and they come back to the house being eaten, I suppose. Thank you for that, Gareth and Hugh. Linda Guppy, Councillor Guppy, you've got a question, do you want to come in?
Yes. Thanks, Chair. I just want to commend on all the officers on this report and this tremendous achievements they've achieved during last year and this year, because it is a small department, and I think for a number of years, year on, we've always said, okay, you've got a tight budget, you have got a small, number of officers covering a huge remit. What happens, in a crisis, and we've hit a crisis, and you've managed and you've changed, and I know you've got all like different specialities within your department, but I'm certainly sure that all of you have all pulled together and helped each other within those different specialities, and it's got to be commended. There's going to be ebbs and flows in standards, but actually it's about what has been achieved, and it's not below standard. It might be a couple of one-off figures that make 5% dip, but so that's got to be commended. And the only there was a comment about the food hygiene which I wanted to ask, and I just hope that can get put on as soon as possible, online. I'm sure that can be achieved. And it was just the performance is about the increase in figures with regarding to mould and fire. I just wondered if got professional experience about issues with mould, but it's about what we're doing about it, because it might be that we're limited of what we can do, but what can we do in view of bringing private landlords and the housing associations to bring up their levels of issues within these homes? It's all okay putting in a new roof and increasing the insulation, but there are issues, and there has such negative impact on families and young children when there's constant mould. Okay, we had quite a long period of hot weather during summer, and from March onwards, but now we're hitting the damp, cold weather, and that figure's going to rise again. And also, I was just a little bit worried about fires. What did that mean? It just got it's just a general heading. And thanks once again.
Thank you. I understand Hugh's going to come in and answer Councillor Guppy's question.
Thank you, Councillor Guppy. Yes, looking at the Category 1 hazards table, this is under 5.2.1 of the housing section. We've got Category 1 hazards graph provided for 1920, and also Category 2 hazards for 1920. Just to advise committee, Category 1 hazards are the hazards we consider to be the more serious, or in the condition that are more serious. Category 2 hazards, exactly the same types of matters, excess cold, damp, etc. But the particular problems in that particular house we don't consider to be quite so bad, but nevertheless still need addressing. Category 1 hazards are hazards where the council has got a duty to make sure are sorted. Category 2 hazards are where we feel the conditions, or we've got a power, I should say, to require the landlords to deal with them if we see fit. But yeah, Councillor Guppy, you're quite right. The three prominent peaks, whether or not a Category 1, whether or not we consider them to be Category 1 or Category 2, are damp, mould, excess cold, and fire. So they seem to be the same issues occurring, and this is throughout the United Kingdom. In Monmouthshire in particular, for a number of years, we have set it out as a priority to deal with these fire and excess cold issues. So officers are, when we're inspecting properties, prioritise these matters and are keen to make sure that they are resolved. The fire safety issues, for example, could be the lack of interconnected smoke detectors, and many landlords, whilst they may have smoke detectors in the property, they may not be interconnected. This is between the ground floor level and the first floor level. So that, for example, then would constitute a hazard to us, and we require works to be done. So whilst it's still very, very important, obviously the matters are addressed, they perhaps are not what members of the committee might consider to be a fire hazard. It could be what we would call very much a technical breach, but nevertheless one that needs to be sorted out. Excess cold is a hazard that particularly concerns us. We're all aware of fuel poverty and the ongoing battles that particularly low-income families have the battle to pay for their fuel, and so we're particularly concerned in properties where there has adequate provision has not been made for heating, and so we try and address that vigorously with the landlords. Damp and mould is an interesting one. I would say probably 8 times out of 10 where the tenants complain about damp and mould, it may be condensation related. And that may on many occasions be down to the lifestyle habits of the tenants, as opposed to the landlord not providing the adequate means for tackling condensation. So obviously you need adequate heating, adequate ventilation to sort out condensation. And what we find particularly with our more modern houses, they are hermetically sealed, and if the window's not opened, the fan's not used, or the heating not used, we get issues there which are not necessarily the landlord's fault. One last point is that, of course, for a number of years now, I think for 5-6 years, landlords in Wales have to be registered with Rent Smart Wales and also have a licensed agent, and that certainly has improved the knowledge with landlords about their responsibilities and certainly assisted us from an enforcement perspective. Hope that's helped answer the question.
Councillor Guppy, do you wish to come back?
No, I just thank you for that, and just to continue at all the work, because we're not out the woods yet in view of able to, you know, work as we did. It's going to be a couple of years before that happens, and then you have to try and keep up and get on top of, you know, the backlog.
Thank you, Councillor Guppy. Okay, so just to wrap up item 4A, Councillor Petruni obviously noted that there was a drop in performance and wanted to know if it was a direct impact of cuts, especially with the noise, inspection and animal welfare. Dave, you confirmed that obviously cuts do impact it, but Hugh suggested that you record the outcomes in 2 ways. So we aim to respond in 3 working days and cases closed within 3 months. He noted that the cases closed within 3 months have actually gone up, but as usual, summertime is usually your busiest time for complaints, and you've got to juggle that with holidays, so your office is down, which limits proactive work. Gareth confirmed that they lost a long-term member and it was difficult replacing that experience, and you had to deal with long-term sickness as well. Obviously, we saw a drop in the number of officers you held after foot and mouth, which were 5, and now you're down to 2.4. But he also updated us with regards to some funding. Councillor Petrini also noted that we're seeing an urge of the increase of people purchasing and taking on pets during COVID pandemic, and we've agreed to set up a meeting with members and Gareth to look into that and some of the work that potentially, you know, you could see an increase in work coming up from that. Councillor Guppy wanted to praise the team and the excellent work carried out by all of you, and she also would like to see the food hygiene training go online, and she also noted some housing issues, in particular mould cases, which obviously Hugh come back and said that this is a priority that you were tackling, but with the help of Rent Smart Wales has helped improve landlords' understanding of these issues. So now we'll move on to item 4B. So I'll hand back over to Dave, and I understand Dave and Jen will be presenting this report.
Thank you, Chair. So 4B is the Gang of 4 that you've just heard from. So that includes Linda. It's 5 then for the registration service.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of 4B, we've done this in sort of note form, really. So it's an extension, obviously, of the annual report we present every year. So if I just cover off, like I said, Jill is currently at a TTP meeting regionally, which we attend, well, numerous times per week, let's just put it that way. So in terms of Jill's side, which we refer to as the commercial team, I think the most pertinent thing there that's had an impact clearly since last April is the contact tracing that is undertaken by Environmental Health. That is supplemented, just picking up Councillor's earlier comments about flexibility. I think Councillor Guppy referred to it. It is positive that you know, Environmental Health trained standards and licensing staff do have interchangeable skills. So in addition to Jill's team, that's very much been front in terms of delivering the TTP service for Monmouthshire, that is supplemented by some from Gareth's team and Linda's as well, and Hughes. So literally all 4 teams contribute in terms of the tracing. I could write a report on TTP, but just to say this has moved to a 77-hour-a-week operation. So that starts at 9 o'clock in the morning. So now you've got a number of tracers on, looking at the cases that come through from NHS Wales, and that covers all the cases that are coming through into COVID positive, and then the tracing team look at them in turn to backtrace to see where they may have contracted that COVID virus. So that is quite an undertaking, really. So in Jill's team particularly, it probably sucks up 50% of their time and resource currently. So that is obviously picking up the other member queries earlier. That obviously creates an issue in terms of the proactive nature, particularly in Jill's team. So in the clinical team, they're very much about proactive visits to restaurants and pubs, etc. That's been quite a difficult process this year with closures, the first lockdown, then the regulations change. So we got numerous licensed premises asking us questions as to what that now looks like, both across Jill's teams and Linda, in terms of how do they comply. So the latest, they changed again on these regulations set 4 now. So that's quite onerous as well to understand the regulations and then obviously relate that back to the trades. So that can be quite time consuming. Events, numerous queries as to what the changes mean. what can they do in terms of 30 people outside? The regulations aren't exactly clear. You need a PhD to navigate some of it, but we do our best in terms of consistent messaging back to the trade and people who want to hold things during a pandemic. So I think in terms of what you got on 4B, obviously the particular focus has been the second line there in terms of contract tracing. And it was started from scratch. So at the end of March, this was set up with the Maren Bevan and PHW colleagues from a blank piece of paper, basically. So it's a credit to the team again to actually get to something that works well. There's a lot of negativity in the media, and I think that's generally geared towards the England model, which is very different to ours. We don't do it through a call centre. It is the environmental health staff that members have probably liaised with in the past. It is the likes of Louise Driscoll, Chris Williams and Thomas that do the hygiene inspections, health and safety visits, and they're also doing the contact tracing work. So it's a credit to them that we set it up and it works well. So just very quickly, in terms of getting to people within 24 hours, which is one of the measures, when I looked earlier this week, we're at 90%. So you're seeing a lot of negativity in the national media, but just to stress, it's very different in Wales, and it's also very different in Monmouthshire, because we've gone down an environmental health delivery model with, as I say, support from trading standards and licensing. So I think that's the main issue in terms of what Jill's team have been involved with since beginning of April. Other little asides that members may not be aware of: key workers accommodation. When Welsh governments release legislation, it will say that shall not go to forms of accommodation. There will be an exemption there for key workers and vulnerable people. So we have worked with housing to ensure that those premises are exempted. They can take key workers, and that piece of work sort of went on in the background. Also over and above is availability of grants. So rather than just sort of be blinking and say this is what we deliver, it's been very much about signposting people to relevant services. So we've been instrumental in, number one, ensuring that grant payments are justified. These businesses exist. There's a lot of fraud, unfortunately. Again, that's been important nationally. But also, in terms of individuals, we've signposted them to the proper channels to get the appropriate grant funding in difficult times. Legionella, when premises shut for the first lockdown, we did spend a lot of time with premises to ensure they do Legionella testing. Because of this water system being stagnant for a long time, there's a likelihood that Legionella can build up in that system. So we've spoken a lot to the trade in terms of ensuring that's all been done right. Care homes is an issue in itself. We won't go into that in any detail, but we did pick that up for Adult Select Committee. Kerry York, that members will know, spoke about the commissioning side, and then we did a supplement in terms of the environmental health response to that in terms of infection control in our care homes, which obviously links in with the contact tracing work. Diversification of businesses, we had a real glut at the beginning of this financial year in terms of, well, I'm a pub, can I provide a delivery type service for that local community? So we're very supportive of businesses diversifying. So 1 minute they're a rural pub, next thing they're sort of spa type facility where elderly and other people could come and have fruit and veg and stuff delivered or pick up from the premises. So we're quite quick to respond to that change in terms of food businesses. You can imagine a lot of reactive work and people saying they've been to a local supermarket, they didn't feel safe. So we obviously follow up all that complaint work in terms of social distancing, etc. Can they improve things? You know, if you have just from a personal experience, my son was working in a fruit and veg section, and if you got the whoops sticker out, then you have a crowd. It's like, something unbelievable arrives because people want to get the discounted lettuces and strawberries. So, speak to them to say, how do you offset that, because it's putting a particular member of staff at risk. People are masked up now, but again, they weren't initially, so we've tried to adapt our advice as things have progressed. So I think, again, I think it was mentioned earlier in terms of the hygiene training, so there has been a drop in income there, which is outlined on the second sheet, in excess of 4,000, which is quite a lot for a small division like ourselves. And we were gearing up to provide a private water supply service to Newport, and obviously that hasn't occurred because of the pandemic. So that's been a bit of a knock to our budget. A couple of good news stories there that Jill put there, the bottom page 2, top of page 3, was about collaboration to ensure that businesses can diversify. So that, you know, literally they can turn up, the food is put directly into the customer's booth. There's a lot of that diversification which we supported. Breweries and distilleries, 2 very successful things in terms of they switched to sanitizers, and there was a massive, if you remember, demand for sanitizers, the actual nationally that can cope. So a local gin distillery and mega brewery that both came forward and provided sanitizer for free, and that was delivered to care homes in terms of the gin distillery, and the mega brewery helped to support our local taxi trade. Because literally at the time, back in April, May, the supply seized up, so they did step in and provided a really helpful supply of sanitizer and wipes to the trade, which is really well received. So just to make that point, really, I think it's that flexibility bit, isn't it? It's not about heads down, we're hygiene inspectors. It's about working more widely. It's not just about enforcement, it's about supporting businesses in difficult times. So I think that would be my comment in terms of the commercial team. And if you note then on the bottom of page 3, that gives an outline of the drop obviously in hygiene visits for the very reason that it's the same people dealing with the pandemic and the TTP service. So overall there's been a 12% increase in those what we call service requests to the team. So it is that issue. There's going to be a particularly difficult year this year, 2021, which will be reported to the governing bodies. There is an understanding from the Food Standards Agency and others that there will be a drop. So that's obviously been raised nationally because it's not unique to Monmouthshire. There will be a complete drop across the UK in terms of routine hygiene visits. Not a problem when pubs are shut, clearly. But, as and when they reopen, we just need to be clear that we do have a presence, and we are still now back to liaising with the trade and ensuring that food safety standards are met. So that's again positive and something we're continuing to do. So if I hand over to Hugh next, Chair, to cover public health. So if the next 3 officers cover their sections in summary, we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Chair. Here we are again. Well, it's been a strange old time, hasn't it, the last 6 months, and certainly we've experienced that in my public health team. Just I think I mentioned it earlier, we got 7 officers in the team, including myself. I think it's 6.8 full-time equivalent, and you know, perhaps for the first week or 2 of COVID, when the lockdown came in March, things went particularly quiet. But then our complaints escalated very substantially. So a service that I think for a number of years has always worked pretty much at flat out capacity. We seen, as you can see from the figure in the table provided, around about a 21% increase in service requests to the team. And I think basically a lot of people were obviously taking the opportunity. A lot of our residents taking the opportunity to sort things out when they're at home, sort out their gardens, do the jobs that haven't been attended to for a number of years. And that gave rise to an escalation in noise complaints and particularly bonfire complaints. Bonfire complaints were causing a lot of concern, particularly because, of course, COVID is so strongly connected to respiratory issues. So we wanted to react very quickly to those smoke nuisance complaints. So our services, the demand on our services on the sort of complaints that we get in very much stayed the same, but lots more of them. In addition, we've seen lots more planning application consultations that have come in. So again, I think people taking the opportunity to plan out what what we want to do to their homes and businesses, etc., whilst they got a bit of spare time to think. So the officers have been engaged a lot more with planning applications. So the same issues, more of them. Flight tipping is, you can see, is an interesting one where the statistics have increased again. We've issued several fixed penalty notices, which are about £300 a time during the period for flight tipping offences and breach of household duty of care. We've got 2 flight tipping prosecutions, which we wait in dates for court. Rats and mice, our complaints of rats have also escalated. We've also got should remind members of the committee that the team's role is particularly one of enforcement. So we've got a prosecution case again awaiting a court date for a resident not dealing with a rat infestation on their property. So again, the same issues, a lot more of them. Of course, what our officers have had is the difficulty of having to investigate these complaints with the COVID restrictions on them. Very much, certainly from March to May, we're only doing visits if in the event of an emergency, and again in the recent fire break, but we still had to deal with the issues. So we're very, very fortunate. I'm very fortunate in the team to have a bunch of extremely experienced officers, and so they've been certainly working smart in trying to deal with these complaints. With almost one arm tied behind the back, certainly in the early months of COVID, by not being able to carry out site visits, other than in the event of an emergency. We've had to be mindful as a public protection department, obviously, to keep our officers safe when we do need to do visits. Touched on earlier that we do a lot of housing inspections. Now that literally means going into a house and inspecting the house. So that's entering somebody's home, which are, obviously concerns for our officers to make sure that they're not then contacts of people with COVID symptoms. We've had to install noise monitoring equipment in people's homes. So we've had to come up with a protocol, and again, our residents have been fantastic, or I should say as well, we're working with us. So, for example, when doing a house inspection, certainly during the summertime period, I've had to ask for family to go and sit outside the garden whilst I've been inspecting the house. It's going to be a little bit more challenging, I think, doing these inspections, and we get a lot more of the housing inspections during the winter time. I don't think I'm going to get a positive response if I ask a family to go out, sit out in the garden in the middle of the winter, but we'll certainly be focusing on social distancing, wearing a mask, not touching any surfaces. And of course, it's important not only to keep our officers safe, but to give reassurance to the householders that we're not bringing in infection ourselves. So basically, the figures there before you, it really has been a matter of trying to work smart and use the knowledge and experience of our team. Digitization, we've been focusing on in particular a use of a noise app, which has enabled members of our community to send in noise recordings, and we can take informed judgments on them, and email, if necessary, the recordings to the persons being complained about with our views, and that's been successful as well. So it's been a heavy prioritization, heavy juggling. 3 of the 7 officers in my team have been involved, certainly the last 2 to 3 months, in contact tracing of index cases, which has involved a lot of weekend working and working in the evenings, and that's been interesting. I should say again, the majority of cases that we've spoken to have been Monmouthshire cases, and again, I would like to applaud our residents on how well they dealing with the symptoms of COVID and providing the necessary information that we need, our contact tracers need. In our portfolio, we also deal with caravan sites, which have obviously been heavily hit throughout the pandemic. So we've been working with site license owners on the phased reopening throughout the COVID period of time, looking at their risk assessments when submitted to us. Moving forward, obviously our proactive work has been very much put on hold, and the proactive work is largely dealing with private water supplies, inspection, dealing with our petroleum licenses and our permits. So in short and medium term, we've got a lot of catch up to play there. Committee will no doubt remember that in March, it was pre-COVID. It seems a lifetime ago now, but it was only in March they give us agreed with our recommendation to start a public consultation on public space protection orders for enhanced dog controls in the county, and that was a 3-month consultation that we were hoping would start in April or May. Now, obviously, we've put that on hold. We're hoping to start it in the new year. To COVID permitting, it's still a high priority for us. We put it on hold because, number one, we didn't think it was the right time to start getting the message out there that we want to increase the dog controls, and we've got to be mindful as well of the tremendous amount of work that a public consultation results in, and our officers are already fully engaged. Just one last point, perhaps on a bit of a light note, moving forward on what our expectations are for next year, when hopefully we get on top of this virus. As I said, my section deals with noise complaints. Are we going to get lots more music festivals? Are we going to go back to the 60s almost? And have to deal with obviously be great to have lots more festivals, etc., and to have at least have some at all, but obviously there may be noise implications, potentially a lot more nighttime working for our officers. Hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight. Happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you, Hugh.
I don't know, Chair, do you want to take questions at the end? If we just sort of
we'll take questions at the end.
Okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
go into
Thanks,
Linda,
Chair.
yeah.
Okay, I think it's my slot now. I've just seen the notice coming up.
Morning, Linda.
Hi all, I'm Linda O'Gorman from licensing. Hope you can all hear me okay. So I'll quickly go over some of the changes with COVID and how it's affected licensing. We are a small team. There is only 5 of us with 4-time equivalent. So what we do, we have to sort of all hands to the pump on during this time, really. We found ourselves at the start of March suddenly becoming frontline COVID officers, you know, on top of our normal everyday sort of work that we would deal with, licensing, processing and enforcement. When it kicked in March and pubs and clubs and restaurants had to close, then obviously our work increased because we had to ensure that that was the case and also give advice, you know, straight away as soon as we had. And very often we find when we get illegal changes, it's quite short notice that we got to get a message out to the trade, you know, to all the license holders. This is what they now need to do. And we have to fathom our way through, as Dave mentioned earlier, sort of a whole realm of sort of regulations and guidance and documents, you know, to get clear, concise message out there, really. We have recognised, though, how hard it is really for the trade during this time, you know, from closing to opening up outside and opening up inside. And with that, we took an active part in the business resilience team. meetings every week, because we recognise this and we want to get people up and running when they can, put measures in place to allow having that footfall, to allow businesses to continue basically, and to sort of give them advice on grants. So we felt we wanted to get all elements of what's out there for licensed trade. So quickly going through, like I mentioned in March, we had to sort of deal with the enforcement side of it as well. But if I go on to the taxi side, I know Dave mentioned about putting other measures in place, like online sort of training and things like that. We've actually, in the report, it said that we were working towards it. But thankfully, we've just had the first safeguarding training done by those means. No easy task, because you've got online training. We have two elements with the taxi trade. We have one when they initially start being a licensed officers, being licensed in the taxi trade, in that they have to have the knowledge test. Now, the knowledge test encompasses all the policies, all the conditions, everything that they must know before actually being a taxi driver. So we got that element, and that took a lot of work by us in licensing. We tried to do it Gwent-wide to make it uniform